Hey, everybody, and welcome to Olivia's Book Club. I'm your host, Olivia Fierro, here in studio with super producer and reader Margaret Stewart. We'll have a moment with Margaret later on in the podcast for some book discussion and recommendations. But right now, I am so excited to introduce to you our novelist who is joining us from California, who wrote a book that I feel like in many ways was speaking directly to me as a Mexican-American girl growing up in Los Angeles. This family is a representation that was very exciting to experience on the page and full of surprises and there is so much to dig into, not only the family aspect, but of course the real palpable sense of the city that only a true Angelino, at least for several decades, could communicate. So thank you so much for joining us, Maria Amparo Escandon, author of LA Weather. Thank you so much and congratulations. Seems that this book has gotten a little bit of attention. What would you say?
Well, yes, a lot more than I ever dreamed of, I mean, really, it's just, when you're alone in your little nook, your little desk, writing away for 5 years just by yourself, and all of a sudden, the book is out and it starts getting a lot of attention, and it's just too overwhelming. It's really, oh my gosh.
So you have had a very successful career. So, let us not pretend that this is, the first time that you are writing a successful piece, but this is different, and it's catching that fire and getting the attention that changes things and puts it on the top of people's to-be-read lists right away, including, I imagine, a phone call from someone within the Reese Witherspoon organization. So tell me how some of this attention, how did it catch you off guard? Did you know as you were completing LA Weather that this was going to be something that was going to resonate with a lot of people right at this moment?
Totally. I mean, when I was finishing writing it was in the middle of a pandemic. And all of a sudden, I realized this is a novel where the whole family ends up living under one roof. And I just kept hearing stories during lockdown of, families coming together to live under one roof. And I said, oh my gosh, it's a different circumstance, of course, but the fact that, a lot of people, more so, young people, students, college people, going back home to spend the pandemic together with their family, created a lot of family interaction. Mm-hmm. Like I said, for better or for worse, right?
Yeah, and even for a tight family like the Alvarados, who have a tradition of being in each other's lives and in each other's business and, doing a family dinner and sharing time together, you don't know what the family dynamic is really anymore when you're an adult coming to the table with your parents. You're sort of reflective, or you kind of regress to what it used to be, or you want things to be based upon your expectations, but reality is often something different. So talk me through, for those who will be listening to this podcast and have heard about the book but haven't yet read it, tell me about this family and they're linked very deeply. I mean, it is a very Latino family in being entrenched in each other and in each other's business. But the daughters are fiercely independent in their own way as well, highly successful in their own ways. And they're starting to see their mom and dad as adults and viewing their marriage in a way that, we don't want to look at it that way when we're growing up. So present how you came up with this picture of this family.
Well, I wanted my previous novels, Esperanza's Box of Saints, which was my first novel. It's a mother-daughter story. And my second novel, Gonzalez and Daughter Trucking Company, was a father-daughter story. So with LA Weather, I wanted to explore more of an ensemble piece where there was family dynamics. So I created this couple who are Latino, but they're a type of Latino. Oscar, his family is of Mexican origin, but but they've been in California even before California was part of the US. So it's one of those people that didn't cross the border
Yep.
crossed him,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then Kayla, she is Mexican, but she's Jewish Mexican. So there's that, right? And so they meet when she is doing, a year abroad in school. She goes to LA. They meet, they fall in love, they marry very young, and they have three daughters. And the daughters they grow up to be professional. And when we meet them, they're all married, and their husbands. And Olivia has a set of twins, little toddler twins, and Patricia, she's the youngest, but she has a 12-year-old son, and that she had during her teen years. And I'm not gonna get into the spoilers, so I'm not gonna tell a lot about it. But this is the family that I present, is the Alvarado family, and they go through a disastrous year.
Mm-hmm.
Disastrous, It's one of those years where, I don't know if you've had them, I have, where you're in the New Year's celebration and you're saying goodbye to the old year and you go, good riddance. It was a horrible year. Enough. I welcome the new year. I don't want to hear any more about the old year. And this is the year that they live from January to December. Everything happens to them. Fires, disease, divorce. I mean, it's just a disaster. And they come together. They were sort of, falling apart as a family. But these crisis after crisis, teaches them a good lesson. And so that's kind of, in general, what the jacket would say in the book, without giving many spoilers.
Yeah, it's almost dare I say, kind of like telenovela style, in that there is just so much crap happening. Like they just go through a roller coaster of everything and then some, all intensified because they love each other so much. So as you're worried about one, another one is going through a crisis of their own, and so there's just an incredible juggling act of trying to keep this family together. And when do you tell who, about this and about the next challenge? But I thought that the way that you lay out this story over this calendar year, and also through the narrative of the weather and how it affects life in Los Angeles, with fires, with risks, with waiting for rain, with drought, it is poetic, and it's just a beautiful storytelling mechanism that allows us to kind of glide along through all of this chaos. So explain to me when you came up with the idea for Oscar and kind of just this zoned out state that he's in. He is nothing. He's a shell of a man, that he used to be when his wife first fell in love with him. And he's got this near obsession with the weather.
Well, that came from my dad. He went through a stage where he sort of found refuge from all his troubles in the Weather Channel. So it was a form of escapism, if you will, where his business was crumbling down, and instead of addressing the issues, he would just focus on the Weather Channel all day. Mm-hmm. And it was so frustrating for my mom and for everybody else. I mean, he lived in Mexico City and I lived in LA, and he would call me every morning, long distance, just to tell me, bring an umbrella, it's going to rain, So he was my weatherman.
Maybe that's just a rite of passage for Mexican men of a certain age, because I've often said to our meteorologist, April, if only you were my father's daughter, he would be so pleased, because I'll say, hey, how are you? What's going on over there? And he'll immediately tell me about the weather, which is Whittier. So, right there in LA County, it's not too different. I know exactly what the weather is. And so I was like, oh, if only I was a meteorologist, he'd be so thrilled, because we could just talk, at length about the varying temperatures and chance for potential rain. maybe.
I know, yeah, but this kind of was the seed for including the weather in the story. But I did eventually evolve the concept of the weather because I did live for 4 years in New York from 2014 to 2018, and in those 4 years, I met a bunch of people tell me very assuredly that there is no weather in LA. And I said, what? What? Come on, So I thought, okay, this is a trope I need to demystify.
Yes.
I need to write about it. And so in the story, all the weather events, whether it's a fire, Santana winds, flash floods, drought, all of that is actually accurate. I went and researched, and if in the book it says there was a fire, there was an actual fire, except for one, which is Christmas. I really wanted it to rain in Christmas, and there was no rain in Christmas on that year. So I made it up. I said, okay, I'm going to make it up. It's okay. It's fiction.
Artistic license in that one way. Well, it is, and I know you're originally from Mexico City, and as you mentioned, I've lived in other parts of the country, but your love for life in Los Angeles and the kind of identity that it evokes is so palpable through the story, and from neighborhood to neighborhood, and identity, and focusing on food and what it's like to drive, and even as you mentioned the Santa Ana winds, that's something that is so distinctively life in Los Angeles and Southern California. So I imagine it's also a bit of a love letter to a city that you now call home.
Absolutely, absolutely. I adore LA. I've lived here, 35 plus years, and it's been a very generous city for me. I've grown here, and I have all my friends, and I just love the city, and I love the food scene. It's incredible. So I wanted to touch on that. I did want to, pay tribute to the amazing diverse food scene that you find in LA. There's over 160 languages spoken in this city, and the same goes for the food. So you can imagine, the variety of just cuisines in the city that I wanted to include, and the neighborhoods. I love going every weekend. I pick a new neighborhood and I just go and walk around, and it's just so different. And it's, people say, that LA is many towns wanting to be a city. And it may be true because every neighborhood has a very distinct personality. So I wanted to convey that as well in the book.
Oh, and you did so well. I mean, you have, if you think about the characters through this book, I mean, we've got a kind of an advertising or media executive, a television chef, a very talented painter, artist. I mean, there's a lot of talent and success wrapped up in the Alvarado family. How important was it and satisfying was it for you to project a Mexican American family like this on the page, and that is not necessarily what we see or hear about? I mean, that celebrates success and is very much just a California family.
Yes, I over the years I became a little tired of seeing Latino drug dealers,
Yeah.
and that kind of. We have successful professions, and we are integrated to corporate life, and we are, we're thriving. I mean, all, one way or another. And I wanted to sort of paint this, here's a family that is a family of professionals. They've managed to get education. They're succeeding in their jobs, but also they're on the brink of disaster. And so they're going to need one another to really keep it together, And so that's kind of the feel of the story.
Yeah, there's a fragility to it because it is a reminder that we can't all have it all, or at least not all the time. And so something may be going really well and then something may be falling apart. And it's a kind of a deep reflection, I think, of the challenges of marriage. And in particular, you say kind of through the sphere as we're looking and reading and consuming things through the lens of the pandemic, where we've been maybe trapped with our spouses more than we ever have before, or, you know, more insulated, more focused on each other for good or for bad. And there's been sort of an amped up intensity to our relationships that have made many fall apart and made others come out stronger. And they're all experiencing that in their own way.
Yes, absolutely. And obviously, it wasn't my intention. Nobody knew about that the pandemic was coming. I was just talking to my husband about, we had a little New Year celebration in 2019, and we were looking at the pictures. Everybody was so happy, hugging and kissing, and oh my God.
It's going to be the best year yet.
I know, but you never know. You never know what's coming. And it's kind of that spirit, about the novel, that, it's almost kind of a brace yourself, because we don't know what's coming.
Mm-hmm. So as I understand it, you write both in English and in Spanish. And so if you're writing LA Weather, you're writing this in English, but you will do your own version to be published in Spanish, right?
That's sort of the pattern that I've done in the past. I did my own translation. And so, I have no problem doing it again. Actually, I'm more comfortable in Spanish than English. English is my second language. I learned it when I was in my 20s. And so I still struggle a little bit, but it does reflect in my writing, because, you won't find a lot of, very elaborate language. I'm very plain and simple, but, the important part is the story.
But so that must create challenges or opportunities, because so you instead of hiring somebody to translate this book into another language, you as the creator of it, you as the writer, as the storyteller, do you then have any instinct or temptation to change things once you've stepped away from this finished product? You're revisiting this family again. Now you're in the midst of it. I mean, is it?
I have.
You have? You have? That's fascinating.
Well, I call it transcreation rather than translation, because it really is. It's not word for word, definitely. When I'm translating, I sort of interpret. And there are some parts, very few instances, but for instance, in the Esperanza's Box of Saints, there was a scene where I say, in the English version, her husband looked like the late Mexican movie idol Pedro Infante. Mm-hmm. And in the Spanish version, I say her husband looked like Pedro Infante. I don't have to say
yes.
Who is Pedro Infante, because it's like explaining Americans who is Elvis Presley. You don't have to say the rock star from the, So I delete that part where I explain who he is, because I know my people, I know my culture, who is, who doesn't know who he is, so little things that I adapt that are culturally appropriate, so I change them and I tweak them, and so that it really sounds like it's not a translation, it's directly written in the language.
It's so interesting. I can't. What a beautiful gift to be able to tell your stories in more than one language to more than one community, and know that how it's being received in that authentic fashion is just it's phenomenal. I don't, as we mentioned, we won't ever do any spoilers, and we never do here on our podcast. But I want to talk to you just about that first. And I don't even know if it's our first chapter or if it's the prologue of the setup for the family to be responding to a crisis, a panic situation. And it is such an intense way to set up this story, this novel, this family, to introduce us to. It's like a gut punch. How did you come up with the way that you wanted to start off the novel?
Well, I wanted to create a scene where um, the grandparents, which is Oscar and Kayla, they're babysitting the toddler twins, and there is an accident. Um, and what I wanted to reflect is how oblivious they were, how focused on their own crisis, their own marriage they were, that they weren't even paying attention. And so, of course, everything, it's not so bad. I mean, I've had readers tell me I almost stopped reading and didn't want to continue because it was so horrible. And I said, wait, it gets better. Yeah. But really, and it is actually a real condition, when the twins, happen to survive. But I did want to say, what were they thinking, kind of a situation. And that is going to be the trigger for, a good part of the novel, and what happens to this couple. Yeah, so it's
very, very effective, because from the reader, you're already going there. You're already imagining what can go wrong in this situation. And the fact that they're not is sort of maddening in that moment. So it does give you a little insight into, at least at this moment in time, these are two people who are not your traditional grandparents, who are all about the grandchildren. They are very complicated people who have lives of their own, and their thoughts are in a lot of places.
Yes, but as it happens with all the characters, they start off very self-absorbed, and self-centered because they have their own issues. But over time, as the novel goes, they evolve and they grow, and they understand how the family is so important. Yeah. And I am a family person. Like, really, for me, that's the most important. And really, family is, number one, and then myself. First the family, and then the family goes first. Yeah. So I wanted to sort of talk about that.
Oh, it's just a fascinating story, and the people are so complex, and the family is just so interesting, and you just did an incredible job with how they communicate and what they're going through. And Lord, we hope that none of us go through all of the things that they go through all at the same time within that one very intense year. Tell me what happens next with this book. I mean, it caught fire. It got everybody's attention. Will we see this on screen and television and the movies? I mean, these are people who we want to spend more time with at the dinner table, whether lives are falling apart or not.
I sure hope so. I sure hope that, and that we see it on the screen someday soon.
Yes.
I really hope so. It's a very visual novel. Yeah. And some of the readers have that contacted me have told me that they could actually see the novel in their minds, and that's a big compliment for me, because I'm a very visual person. Esperanza's Box of Saints was made into a movie, Santitos, and it was an amazing experience. And so I would love to repeat that, of course, but it's not really up to me. So I'm hoping somebody will, it'll be on somebody's radar and they will want to make it. And we'll see, hopefully.
Oh, I'm sure, and I'm sure people would be very happy to see that representation on screen. It would be a wonderful experience. As we wrap up, Maria, two quick things. We always want to know from novelists who have a passion for stories, when do you remember, or what was it that you remember first in your life that you really fell in love with reading? What was that moment, that special book, the story, maybe the library that showed you the magic that could happen that put you on this career path? And lastly, I know that you do some teaching and you've been part of the UCLA Extension program. And what do you fundamentally give as the best bit of advice to someone who aspires to writing a story, whether it's a short story or a novel or a screenplay, who is such a fan of your work? How do they sit down and know what to put down?
Okay, your first question. When I was maybe, I don't know, 9 years old, Santa Claus brought me a typewriter. And
really?
So as a writer, who gives a kid a typewriter, right, when you're little? But I guess my mom was very interested in my stories, and she wanted me to write them because I was a storyteller ever since I was a little girl. And as a reader, I think the book that did it for me, the book that I said, I want to be a writer, was 100 Years of Solitude. Gabriel Garcia Marquez. It's still to date one of my favorite books of all times. And so it's what really made me be a storyteller and a writer. And then the second question, what I tell my students at UCLA, I teach creative writing there, and I tell my students, I say, okay, raise your hand, those of you who are aspiring writers, and everybody raises their hands. And then I ask, okay, raise your hand, those who have written something, whatever, a journal, a little story, a poem. Everybody raises their hand, and I say, well, then you're not aspiring anymore. Once you start writing, you're not aspiring, you're writing. And all you need to do is log 10,000 hours of actual writing. And actual writing is not typing. It's not sitting in front of the computer. You could be writing at the grocery store. You could be writing in the car because you're thinking about your stories. And that, to me, is part of the writing process. And so, just live with your characters, live with your stories in your head, and then you can download it into your computer. But think about it, and thinking about it is really where the real creative process happens.
That was so much fun to talk to you. Thank you so very much. Our author today, Maria Amparo Escandon. The book is LA Weather. If you have not picked it up yet, get on with it. You will not regret it. Maria, congratulations again, and thank you so much for sharing today.
Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. This was so special.
Oh, it was all my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, LA Weather is really a book that people have been talking a lot about, and so it was a pleasure to be able to talk to Maria Amparo Escandon and just kind of dive into everything that she was bringing into this story. And for me, it was a really exciting reflection as Latina to get this complex family story told. And so for that reason, I would love to see it definitely as a series or as a film too, just for sheer casting to have those opportunities.
Yeah, I think that'd be incredible. And I mean, really, that is a stunning cover.
Oh, I know, it's so good.
It's so specifically LA too. It's got the pool, it's got a fire, it's got a palm tree, of course. And so it's just like, it's perfectly what you see in LA.
Yes.
What I would think.
Yes. So, and it's and it just the narrative that she uses to progress us through the wildest year of this family's lives is just to me very effective. So it's very moody, and I was telling my sister is one of those people who is like a hardcore Angelina. Like she would never in a million zillion years live anywhere outside of even LA County. So it is just just a thing. And so I'm like, you got to read this book. Like, this book is for you. You have to read it.
Oh, yeah. Well, she will probably really enjoy it then. If it's so I have not been able to start it yet. I've been finishing some other things. But I'm really looking forward to reading.
Yeah, and over in the past September, there was a lot of lists out about different books to read, to do kind of a Hispanic heritage reading list. And so there have been some very prominent authors coming out with really popular books. One of them you enjoyed.
Yes, Mexican Gothic. I actually read this in 2020. It's by Silvia Moreno Garcia. And similar in fashion as, I feel like a lot of the books that we tend to read have a lot of family tropes. This one is interesting because it is a young woman, a debutante. She gets this frantic letter from her cousin who had been whisked away and married an Englishman. And this letter is just super bizarre. And so she loads up all of her beautiful ball gowns and heads up to this. They call it the countryside. To me, in my mind, it was basically like a town on the edge of a mountain. It's very not well inhabited, and it's this big Gothic mansion. And she's, invited to stay there with her cousin who seems to be ill. Something's wrong with her, physically, not so much, mentally more so. And so this girl is just flopping about the mansion, trying to figure out what's going on in her big ball gowns and going to dinner.
To impress.
Yeah, really dressed to impress, and they are not. And they basically have, they're keeping like it super dark and not a lot of like the food is very specific, and there's a lot of weirdness happening.
Yeah.
And it's very Gothic. That's a perfect word for it. There's just something weird's going on, and this is supposed to be a little bit of fantasy horror, I think. And it's just so interesting. And I felt very, very much a part of that family story as her trying to figure out what's wrong and trying to remove her cousin from this situation.
I am so mad at myself that I haven't read that yet. And I actually purchased it as a hardcover, and it is sitting in my actual physical shelf, which is in the bedroom of the priority books that I have. And it's still there. And then also she came out with, it was Velvet Was the Night, which I know I saw some videos with her saying, like, if you love Mexican Gothic, don't expect the same type of book. I'm bringing you something completely different, which I think is fantastic.
I really liked Mexican Gothic. I would be very interested in reading something completely different from her. And I think that keeps things fresh and lively.
Oh, yeah. I mean, once you started getting it, I mean, it is great to feel like, okay, I have a feel for an author. I know what I'm going to get. You want to kind of go back to that well a lot because it's delivering in the same theme, like thematically. But also, I mean, if you're a really creative person and you're constructing these new worlds, you shouldn't ever feel limited just because you had a successful novel. I mean, that's the thing. It's like that the limitations of success. You're successful with one thing, and then people want more of that one thing. Right. Which is unfair.
Until they don't. And then it's kind of like, I think about Jen McKinley, who we talked to a few weeks ago. She has a whole series on baking mysteries. And then she went,
and a library series.
Yeah, a library. Yeah, but she's changed the genre for herself. I mean, she's keeping it lively for herself and also keeping her readers interested or picking up new readers. I had never read any of her books until Paris Is Always a Good Idea. And I loved it. And now I want those, and now I'm curious as to her other novels.
Right. It's tapping into all different sides of your personality, just like you have. You have a friend who you want to go shopping with, and maybe a friend you go to have drinks with, and somebody you go exercise with. So now she's creating books for these different groups of people.
Exactly. Right? It's like Taylor Jenkins Reid also had romantic little rom-coms before these like more historical time pieces. It's a historical novel, or it's kind of hard for me to place it in that way. It's more like this historical.
These are like more sweeping women's fiction, but also with these very unique narratives that she's become so famous for.
But they're and those are so different. And I think it's fun to genre hop.
Yes.
I'm enjoying it.
If you are looking for a little taste of kind of Latino life, there's also a book called I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter, which is written by Erica Sanchez, and it's technically categorized as YA. And I read this a couple years ago when it came out, and I absolutely loved it. It spoke to me very much in the way of how Mexican families can be very traditional. Their expectations for your behavior can be very taxing and rigid. She's also, it's a fairly impoverished family, very, very, very working class. So, just a lot of hurdles that she has to go through, and just a lot of frustration, that teen angst of like, I want to be American like those other girls are American, you know, like those other people that have more freedom and more, parents that don't ride them for every single thing, and that people have money to spend, and, all of this. They want like a path to like a life like you see on television, and your life is not quite like that.
Not quite.
Yeah. And you're also sort of riding the line, as many people do who are maybe a second generation, say, of you're not quite at home, say in your native, what would be the family's native country at all, and then yet your identity as a Latino in this case is really face forward when you meet other people and they're trying to understand your family and your culture, and you're just kind of in the middle and you're not exactly fitting in either side. So it's this, they do a really good job. A super enjoyable book, and actually I saw on her social media they were workshopping it as a play.
Oh.
And so that is something that's going to happen, and it appears, and that would be really good. It's a really great story.
That's really interesting. We haven't talked about many books that go in that direction instead of our televisions or silver screen. I think that's a really great idea. Similar to Dear Evan Hansen being a play first, then a novel. So I love that.
How are you doing digging into your TBR? How many books do you have going right now?
Currently in the works, I'm in about 3 or 4 right now. I have an audiobook that I'm halfway through that is chugging along very slowly. I'll talk about that eventually on this podcast. I might not be smart enough for it. That's what I'm thinking currently.
I doubt that.
It's taking a lot
I doubt that.
to understand. And again, I'll talk about that one another time. I'm also reading a book currently that doesn't come out till March.
See, that's what's so hard. We're so fortunate
Very fortunate.
Be in the mix on the NetGalley, but it's really hard for me to make smart choices about what to read next when you have all of these options. It's almost it's like being at a buffet.
It's
and
very difficult. Yes, it's
too
like,
much.
Do I have dessert first?
Right.
Because I see that, and that's kind of what happened. It was this. It's a novel by an author I'd already read, Simone St. James, and I really loved The Sundown Motel, and this is her new novel coming, and so I'll talk about that later if I so recommend. But so far, I'm really liking it, and that was kind of the problem. Like, I didn't pay attention to the release date because I have a ton of other books that have already been released and are currently coming up, and I went straight for that one. Like, whoop. Sorry.
I know. I almost did that the other day. I'm like, okay, I'm ready for something new, and I was about to click on the new Sally Hepworth, and then I just said, okay, I'm holding back because that's April 2022.
Oh my gosh.
So,
we've got some time on that one.
I'm going to take a breath and save it for myself. It'll be like a little carrot that I'm holding out there for, maybe over the holidays.
Totally. Yes.
Because I know I'm going to love it.
I think so.
Margaret, thank you very much. Motivating me to pick up at least another couple of books. Let's get some juggling going, why don't we?
Or a book you already own.
Yes, you're right.
Let's start that one.
Smart. Thank you. Thank you for helping me watch the budget
economic,
as well.
Yeah.
She's so smart. You're good at math, too. Reading and math, it's all too much.
Don't hold me to that one.
See you next time. Thanks. Thanks for listening to Olivia's Book Club, the podcast. I'm your host, Olivia Fierro. Our producer is Margaret Stewart. We want to hear from you, so send us an email to oliviasbookclub@azfamily.com. Let us know what you're reading, and check out the Olivia's Book Club Facebook group, or you can follow along on Instagram at olivias.bookclub, or Margaret is at Overbooked and Overdue. Make sure to rate and subscribe to this podcast, and please tell your friends.